I am happy to be back on Zoom. Pleased to announce that we've got Jack Bales here tonight. Jack is retired now after what, over 40
Over
years
40 years.
of work. Yeah, as a reference and humanities librarian at the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Longtime SABR member, author of Before They Were Cubs, the early years of Chicago's first professional baseball team, which is currently available from McFarland. He also authored the Chicago Cub Shot for Love, a showgirl's crime of passion in the 1932 World Series, which is available from History Press. And that book was based in part, Jack, right, on your 2016 Baseball Research Journal article
Right.
about
Uh-huh.
the
Yep.
shooting of Billy Burgess, right?
Yes, sure
All
was.
right. Yeah, and an article that, if I could say, is brilliant. I love the article. It's so interesting. You get into not just Billy, but so much of Violet Popovich's background and kind of her obsession and so forth. And the voters agreed and was voted a 2017 McFarland Saber Research Award winner too. So,
Mhm.
but Jack, who's originally from Aurora, is joining us from Virginia and is going to talk tonight about Chicago's 19 or 1886 baseball team. And take it away, Jack.
Okay. Before we get started, I might add that I'm doing a talk on Violet and Billy for that. They meet every Monday. Well, Karen, you know what it is. Bruce, I can't remember his last name, but Violet's nephews is going to join me for that particular one. It's going to be in October. We'll have a lot of fun. Uh,
Oh, fun.
yeah.
Oh,
But
Bruce
anyway, thanks
McClure,
everybody.
what is he in? Out in New England, right? Bruce McClure?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, New
Oh,
Hampshire,
okay.
New
Oh,
England.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I can't think of the date off the top of my head. John, I can let you know.
Okay,
But
yeah.
yeah. But anyway, thanks very much, everybody, for coming here. In fact, my research for this has prompted me to begin a book on the 1880s White Stockings, and Ed Hardig has been a real fount of good advice and feedback for this. I've gone through William Hulbert's papers at the Chicago History Museum, and I'm having a good time doing it. But anyway, first of all, I want to give you some background material on what led up to 1886. And when Chicago White Stocking President William Hulbert died in April 1882, Secretary Albert Spalding took over, and he set out to put his own mark on the baseball club. And the team had been playing at White Stocking Park since 1878. And it was located just west of Lake Michigan, as you can see here, between Michigan Avenue and the Illinois Central Railroad tracks and south of Randolph Street, which was a very easy walk from the city's business district. And the park's foul lines were quite short. In fact, with the left and right field fences measuring less than 200 feet, the park had the shortest dimensions in the National League, and balls hit over those fences were ruled doubles, not home runs. And seating too was a problem, which Spalding solved after the 1882 season by doubling the seating capacity from 5,000 to about 10,000. And he added, I think, 18 private boxes on top of the grandstand too. So the White Stockings now had a remodeled ballpark, but unfortunately no immediate glory. But the team finished in second place in 1883. But it got worse the next year. For in the spring of 1884, Chicago's newspapers reported on a possible problem, which was the lack of discipline among the ball players. And the Chicago Daily Tribune announced that, quote, Captain Anson declared that he was not going to stand any foolishness this season, no late hours, no bumming, no indifferent play, that he would fine every man who fell short of strict obedience in this respect and double the fine for each succeeding offense. Now, the captain and manager was, of course, the well-known Adrian Cap Anson, who had joined the team in 1876. The Tribune continued that Spalding told Anson that to enforce discipline, he would even hire private detectives to follow any players who slipped out of the hotels at night, and he did do this. And the White Stockings played Boston that month, and two of the players were fined $50 each for drunkenness. And the Tribune, for their part, said that if even half of the reports about the players at that time were true, then 2 or 3 or more men should have been fined $50 for being earlier in the season. Now, the White Stockings finished the 1884 season in fourth place, and the news was not all bad, though. Mike Kelly won top honors with his .354 batting average. Also, a rule change for 1884 put balls clearing the Chicago's short outfield fences as home runs, no longer doubles. And on May 30th, Ned Williamson became the first Major League Baseball player to hit 3 home runs in one game, and he topped the league that year with 27. But Spalding had more problems than just his fun-loving, hard partying players. For now, he was forced to look for a new place for a ballpark. As it turned out, the city did not have the authority to allow any person or party to use public land for private or commercial purposes. Public land, no private purposes. So he decided to relocate to Chicago's heavily populated west side, and he chose a city block bounded by Congress, by Harrison, by Loomis, and Throop streets. And there'd be other changes in 1885. Now, Spalding was really serious when he said that the team needed more discipline, and he stipulated that during the spring training down south, the team would practice both during the day and in the evenings as well. And all that work paid off. For the White Stockings won 18 of their first 24 games, all on the road, and more than 10,000 fans inaugurated the new West Side Park. The West Side Park, it was called, on June 6th. Excuse me. They filled all the seats. There's a bicycle track around the field. They filled that. They were in windows across the street. It was a very big deal, of course. And they finished the 1885 season in first place with a remarkable 87-25-1 record, 2 games in front of the New York Giants. The Philadelphia Phillies were in third place, 30 games behind Chicago. Okay, now it gets interesting. We start seeing the beginning of the end, so to speak. And what I just talked about was important, as I wanted to illustrate what Spalding always made, in that Spalding made it clear that he was the boss. Mark Lamster wrote in this book, Spalding's World Tour, that Spalding, quote, was bold but never foolish. He did not drink to excess, and he forbade those who worked for him from doing so. He knew how to delegate, but when matters were pressing, there was no question as to just exactly who was in command, and that was him. Now, while going through Chicago's various newspapers, I discovered that this was not an understatement. I found time and time again this was not an understatement. For example, during the World Tour of 1888 to 89, columnist Eugene Field wrote that, quote, Mr. Spalding deducted $800 from Williamson's salary on account of, I'm sorry, let me backtrack. During the World Tour of 88 to 89, infielder Ned Williamson injured his knee during a game. As I recall, he was in Paris. There was like a cinder outfield or cinder infield. I can't remember now, but he fell down and he injured his knee on all the cinders on the track or on the field or whatever. And the doctors did a very poor job of treating it, and it got infected, and it bothered him almost, I think, for the rest of his life. But anyway, the Daily News columnist Eugene Field that wrote that, quote, Mr. Spalding deducted $800 from Williamson's salary on account of that protracted illness, and $500 more for Mrs. Williamson's expenses on this trip around the world. Now, as I said, Eugene Field was a Chicago Daily News columnist, and the Daily News is not available online. So I got the microfilm for this whole year, and I read read all of his columns. Called Sharps and Flats was the name of his column, and his literary reputation today rests largely on his children's poetry, such as Little Boy Blue and Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod, which I thought was kind of cool. But he was a big Chicago fan. Now, financially, 1885 was a good year for the team. The players benefited too. They had signed temperance pledges in April before they left Chicago for spring training, and for keeping their word and for winning the league pennant. Each eligible man was promised $100. By the way, this photograph I've seen all over the place. I spent a long, long time trying to figure out all these players because it was mislabeled in all sorts of them. And I think this guy was the one who took the biggest amount of time. I think it was Elmer Sutcliffe, and Ed, I hope I have him right there. Anyway, um, there were still postseason games to play. In 1884, the leading teams of the National League and American Association had faced off in a series of games to determine the United States championship. And the Providence Grays had defeated the New York Metropolitans that year, and not surprisingly, a similar series was planned for 1885 between the White Stockings and the Association's league leader, the St. Louis Browns. Um, Unfortunately, the Chicago players' discipline and drive ended after they clinched the league pennant. One Chicago reporter said that there was a complete lack of interest in the ball playing. And after the first game on October 14th in the best of 7 series, the Chicago Daily Inner Ocean wrote that, quote, the Chicagos played a very poor game, both at bat and in the field, while the visitors played a creditable game at both points, excuse me. And the game ended in a 5-5 tie that was called on account of darkness after 8 innings. Now the Browns forfeited game 2 in Chicago after they got into an argument with the umpire and walked off the field. And the two teams split the next 4 games, 2 each, 2-2. And prior to game 7, the two managers agreed not to count the forfeited second match, which left the series even at 2 games each and 1 tie. So the deciding game was played on October 24th, which Chicago resoundingly lost by the score of 13-4. And that made the series 3 games for St. Louis, 2 for Chicago, and 1 tie. And now we get to see Chicago President Albert Spalding at full temper. He was unwilling to accept the fact that his team lost, and he bitterly complained in the newspapers that Chicago had not agreed to throw out that second game. The teams were now tied at 3-3, and he wanted to play St. Louis one more time, but the teams disbanded, and the two clubs agreed to declare the series a draw. And that decision, Sporting Life wrote, quote, ends all further controversy on the subject, end quote. What did not end, though, was Spalding's frustration over what new sports writer called his team's, quote, miserable exhibition of ball playing, unquote. Newspapers had reported that Cap Anson reprimanded center fielder George Gore for his laziness during game 1, which is probably true. His work ethic at times was not the best, though he's a heck of a ball player, though. Spalding had suspended the ball player without pay for the remaining games, with future evangelist Billy Sunday taking Gore's place in the outfield. And according to Spalding, quote, this is Spalding's exact words according to a newspaper article, unquestionably, our boys have played very poor ball during the entire series, but their interest in play was gone. On the other hand, I saw some reporters arguing that since there were few monetary rewards during the postseason, it was not surprising that the players had little interest in baseball because the stands were fairly empty, as the fans were not particularly interested anyway, because it was basically an exhibition game, I guess, which meant that there were little in gate receipts. The season was over, so why bother, was the attitude. And Sporting Life pointed out, quote, the games amount to nothing financially as they are recognized as exhibition games and are slimly patronized. To which I came back with, well, they got to make some money in gate receipts. I'm not sure if that's completely true, and I should look into that a bit more, because they did make money in 1886. Anyway, but even without a championship, The White Stockings 1885 season had still been a memorable one. Captain and first baseman Cap Anson had led his team with 144 hits and 108 runs batted in. He topped the National League with his runs batted in. In fact, outfielders Abner Dalrymple, he plays a big role in the next season. He and Mike Kelly had led the league in home runs with 11 and 9 each. The National League had legalized overhand pitching at its November '84 meeting, and pitcher John Clarkson, who was a real workhorse for Chicago, he won 53 games and finished the season with a 1.85 ERA. The White Stockings president lost little time in reserving his star players, and by early '85, November '85, most had agreed to play for Chicago, including center fielder George Gore, who I guess got back in Spalding's good graces. The team members met up. Now we get into the big year, 1886, and they met up in Chicago on March 13th, 1886, where they departed for Hot Springs, Arkansas, for spring training, for practice games. And on that day, March 13th, the Chicago Daily Tribune observed, quote, "The members of the team will abstain altogether from beer, from wine, from whiskey, or other intoxicating drinks of any kind, and will continue to do so until the last ball in the coming championship series has been pitched." You know, the last ball. Now, Detroit was the opponent the White Sox had to worry about that year. The two teams faced off in a crucial series in early July, and Detroit was confident of victory because they had played Chicago 2 games early. Had recently taken 2 games from Chicago, or 2 out of 3 from Chicago, and in part due to the fine hitting and the fine fielding of the well-known Big Four ball players that Detroit had acquired from the Buffalo Bisons. The Big Four were Dan Brothers, Hardy Richardson, Jack Rowe, and Deacon White, whom I had talked about earlier today. And the Wolverines were undoubtedly shocked when Chicago won all 3 games. You see Deacon White in the far left over here. He looks like a deacon, which I guess is how he got his nickname. I love this illustration here. I'm gonna have to put this in my forthcoming book. I think I really like that. Anyway, the White Stockings were now just 1.5 games behind Detroit, and from July 14th, think of this: from July 14th to the 23rd, they won 9 games in a row. But unfortunately, Detroit also piled up the victories, and Chicago gained no ground in the standings. But they did, however, make the news all over the place at the end of July when newspapers reported that Spalding had hired detectives to follow his players and report to him if any had broken the temperance pledges they had signed in March. And as you can see here by this page 1 article in Sporting Life, Spalding was right to be suspicious. And it turned out more than just a few of the players had tripped up, as this article says, and more than just several, as this article says, for 7 of them had been reported for drinking. Now, news had gotten back. I mean, Spalding's a real piece of work here, I think. Anyway, the news had gotten back to Spalding, and so he called in the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And for 6 weeks, the players were followed both in Chicago and on the road. And Spalding received the agency's report on July 23rd, and he levied $25 fines on these 7 players. And the men were never, ever, ever seen drunk. But according to the Chicago Herald, quote, "It was reported that all of the 7 had been drinking more or less for the past 3 weeks, especially when out of the city, and the fines were imposed merely as a warning." Now, Mike Kelly, who was renowned as a prankster and a partier, loved both liquor and a good time. He told sports writer Harry Palmer that he occasionally enjoyed, quote, "a glass of the foaming or an bracer with a little sugar. It did me good and I wanted it. And when I wanted it, I got it. And that's all there is to it." As I said, Kelly was a real prankster, and he really bent the rules of baseball. He concealed baseballs in the outfield grass. So if a opposing player got a long hit, he'd find one of his, carefully concealed balls, and so deny the runner an extra hit. When an umpire wasn't looking, they only had one umpire back then, so he'd go home from second by way of the pitcher's box sometimes, or at least he'd bypass third base a lot of the times. In fact, newspapers even commented. Just last week, I was reading a Chicago Tribune article in 1881 where Kelly did just that. He bypassed third base, but the Tribune referred to this as, quote, some daredevil base running by Kelly, which I thought was kind of funny. Now, for his part, Spaulding admitted to Palmer that his men had not gotten drunk and had only taken an occasional drink. But he did say, though, that reports had reached him that compelled him to take some action. Remember what I said before? He was in command. But my first thought, and sporting writers thought the same thing, he was way too hasty in taking action. Remember, the players had not lost a game since July 13th. What did I say? They won 9 in a row, 9 in a row. And critics thought that, hey, you put the fines in after defeats, not after the victories. But the timing was of no concern to Spaulding whatsoever. He wanted the ball players to remember that during the season, they were under his rules, his policies, and he expected everyone to follow them. Out of their credit, the unhappy White Stockings did not let up the pace for this championship race, and the club managed to stay close behind the first place Detroit, and on October 9th, Chicago trounced the Boston Bean Eaters 12-3 to secure the 1886 National League pennant. Here we go. Now, President Spaulding immediately sent a telegram to Cap Anson and the team, and he wrote, quote, in this telegram, "You have clinched the pennant in great style. Knew we could depend upon the old war horses in a pinch. You have won the league championship. Now come home and win the world's championship. As a token of my appreciation of your work, I herewith tender each man of the team a suit of clothes, and the team collectively one half the receipts in the coming series with St. Louis. Accept my heartiest congratulations, A.G. Spaulding." Now, he recalled the previous year's ill-fated championship series with the St. Louis Browns, owned by Chris Bonderhahe, I guess that's how it's pronounced, and he hoped that his generosity will motivate his players to take the game seriously. I mean, dream on, Spaulding, sorry. We had agreed to play the Browns on the condition that the winning club received the total gross gate receipts. He also made stipulations concerning the playing rules and the selection of the umpire. And as he told the Browns owner, quote, "In view of several misunderstandings that occurred in our series last season, I deem it wise to have all the conditions agreed upon and understood." And the Browns president did indeed understand, and the men agreed to play a best-of-7 series in mid-October with 3 games scheduled in Chicago and 3 in St. Louis. And if necessary, a 7th game would be played in a mutually agreed upon location. Now, the temperature was only in the mid-50s in Chicago on October 18th, but nevertheless, every seat in the Chicago ballpark was filled for the first game between the National League and American Association champions. And the Chicago Times reported that, quote, "The spectators found that it was warmer to stand up and yell than it was to sit still in silence, and consequence, the noise was somewhat deafening." And the home crowd undoubtedly yelled even more after John Clarkson pitched a magnificent 6-0 shutout. And unfortunately for the White Stockings, St. Louis shut down Chicago and pitcher Jim McCormick in the second game, 12-0 here. In the third game, Clarkson once again pitched for Chicago, and the White Stockings managed an easy 11-4 win. And with the White Stockings ahead, 2-1, the series moved to St. Louis. Okay. Now, Cap Anson had only John Clarkson to pitch, as Jack O'Flynn had a sore arm and pitcher Jim McCormick complained of rheumatism in his feet. And the tired Clarkson made a valiant effort, but the Browns evened the series 2-3 on October 21 with an 8-5 win. Now it gets interesting here because right before the team left for Chicago, Spalding had signed pitcher Mark Baldwin from the Northwestern League. And the club president had told Cap Anson that Baldwin would come in handy if they got in a bind in St. Louis. And that bind appeared in Game 5, but the Browns owner objected to Baldwin pitching as he had not played with Chicago during the regular season. So St. Louis's protest was upheld by the series board of umpires, but they didn't really think about it too much. All they did was flip a coin, and St. Louis won, and so Baldwin was out. So Anson needed to rest Clarkson, so the team captain had little choice but to start shortstop Ned Williamson as pitcher. He pitched only into the second inning and was replaced by outfielder Jimmy Ryan, and the Browns easily won that game 10-3. So now the Browns were winning, as you can see here, 3-2. So both teams were on the field on October 23rd for what turned out to be the final match of the series. Clarkson, throwing his fourth game in 6 days, carried a 3-0 lead into the 8th inning. But then St. Louis scored, and then Chicago left fielder Abner Dalrymple misplayed, and that's the crucial thing here. He misplayed Arlie Latham's deep fly ball, and 2 more St. Louis players reached home, and the score was tied. And the Browns' Kurt Welch was on third base in the bottom of the 10th inning when Clarkson threw a pitch that got past catcher Mike Kelly. Newspaper accounts, and I read a whole bunch of newspaper accounts while working on this. They differed as to whether it was a wild pitch or a pass ball, or it could have been a pitch out. But according to the Chicago Daily News, whose report I kind of like, third baseman Tom Burns gave catcher Mike Kelly played both right field and catcher, a signal to catch Welch at third trying to steal. Now, Kelly played slightly away from the plate, but, quote, Clarkson put a ball over the plate, which Kelly just touched with his fingers and bounded away to the grandstand while Welch came in with the winning run. And this has become one of the most famous plays in 19th century baseball, with the victorious Browns receiving the total gate receipts of the series. It's often been mythologized as the $15,000 slide. But no game day accounts indicate that Welch actually slid in this, and I read all the reports. The Sporting News reported that, quote, he trotted home, which I think is probably true. And 2, the receipts from the 6 games amounted to $13,920.10, not $15,000. So see here, they got big gate receipts, unlike, I guess, the year before. I'll get into what Chicago ball players and Spalding thought of the games, and Spalding in particular. But first of all, as you can see here, the team had much to be proud of. They had finished the 1886 season with 90 wins, 34 losses, and 2 ties. They were 2.5 games in front of the second-place Detroit Wolverines. Chicago had led the league in various categories, including 900 runs, 673 runs batted in. Look at all the records, the honors won by the Chicago players. Mike Kelly led the league with a .388 batting average. Anson finished second at .371. John Clarkson, I referred to him as a workhorse. He won 36 games for Chicago. And even Anson himself was proud of his men. And Anson was not one to spread out the compliments willingly, but he said in his memoir, quote, that the team that brought the pennant back to Chicago in the years 85 and 86 was, in my estimation, not only the strongest team that I ever had under my management, but taken all in all, one of the strongest teams that has ever been gotten together in the history of the National League. But all these accolades didn't stop the old blame game, especially Abner Dalrymple. And he wasn't the greatest of all time, the GOAT in that respect, but he sure was the GOAT in this game. Unfortunately, he had misjudged Arlie Latham's long fly ball in the eighth inning, and he was upset with himself. He took this seriously, particularly as both as his teammates and Spalding blamed him for the entire loss. And Spalding had said after the game that, quote, Dalrymple ought to have caught that ball, while one player remarked that other men of the team, quote, would have smothered it, unquote. Now, sports writer Harry Palmer, however, sensibly argued in Sporting Life that some of the players had believed that their work had ended after the regular season. And he wrote, quote, had they entered the contest with the same ardor and determination that characterized the work of the Browns, the result might have been different. Also, this was just one lousy play. How about the rest of the whole game? Other players could have picked up the slack too. So, as I said, he was the GOAT here. And besides being annoyed with Dalrymple, and the newspapers were full of this at the time, Spalding was really annoyed at the Browns owner for objecting to Mark Baldwin pitching in Game 5. By the way, there were rumors of game fixing on both sides, but both owners just put that in its place right immediately. And I don't think there was any game. At least I never saw any real accusations of game fixing. Spalding both teams played hard. Spalding just believed that his team did not play hard enough. In fact, in St. Louis, he told a reporter, quote, I've been so hot and mad over the way the club played ball or didn't play it, unquote. And he was still fuming when he got home. In fact, the Chicago Herald observed that, quote, it is an open secret that President Spalding hasn't had a good night's sleep since that memorable contest. This is where I got the title for my talk. The players' alcohol consumption was like an open secret in Chicago, and no doubt also kept him awake at night. Beer Beats Him was the title here in the Inner Oceans article on the defeat of the White Stockings in Game 2. And even sports writer Henry Chaddock, of course, he was no fan of Spalding, I guess. He insisted that Chicago had lost the game because of Jim McCormick's, quote, weak exhibition of pitching due to his overindulgence in drinking. And Spalding had an interview with a Chicago Herald reporter, and he wrote about Jim McCormick. He drank about as much as all of the rest of them put together. He lost all his effectiveness before the season was half over. The influence of drinking men on the morals of the club is bad. I won't have it, and the newspapers can poke all the fun they want to, but I mean business, and I'll stick to it to the end. I will not have a man in the club who will not sign a temperance pledge for the season and keep it to, end quote. By the way, I think I mentioned that McCormick said he had rheumatism, and a couple of sports writers I saw said that, it wasn't really rheumatism so much as just he had been out, a little bit too much drinking, I guess. Naturally, the ball players resented Spalding's stubbornness about drinking, especially when the temperance policy violations cost them money. Spalding, though, had no sympathy for the men. He explained to sports writers that when the ball players signed their contracts for 1886, he emphasized that there was a clause prohibiting them from drinking during the season. And as an incentive, he promised them a bonus for not drinking and more money if the team won the championship, as you can see here by this typical temperance agreement. But now things really started unraveling, especially starting with George Gore. In this, and he was just a great player. He made a lot of errors, and I'm not sure if he'd ever make the Hall of Fame because of his errors, he could be kind of lazy sometimes. But anyway, in the 7 seasons from 1880 to 1886, the White Stockings placed first in the National League 5 times, and George Gore was a major part of that success. His first year was in 1879. In 1880, he led the league with his batting average of .360. His 7-year average was 320 from 1880 to 1886. But he was also one of the ones whom Spalding fined in July 1886, and he was really furious about that fine. And the newspapers were full of his anger about that, and he complained long and bitterly about this. He was fed up with Spalding. In November 1886, he went to the New York Giants. Pitcher Jocko Flynn compiled a 23-6 mark with an ERA of 2.24. He would pitch for only one season, though. As Cap Anson recalled years later, quote, his arm gave out while he was with us, and besides that, he got into Bass Company. There's that Bass Company and wild partying again. He found the pace much too rapid for him, and he fell by the wayside. Still, though, Flynn holds a place in the record books for the most wins by a one-year pitcher. Here's our friend Abner Dalrymple again. The White Stockings needed a scapegoat. They had one with Abner Dalrymple, and Spalding and his teammates, even his teammates, continue to blame him for the loss of the deciding game of the championship series. He desperately wanted a change, and after Spalding granted his release in November '86, he joined the American Association's Pittsburgh Alleghenies. In fact, one of the reasons I think Pittsburgh got him because they were vying for a spot in the National League for 1887, which they got, and they wanted a big name player, and he would be in Pittsburgh in the National League in '87. Pitcher Jim McCormick and catcher and right fielder Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly was a fan favorite in Chicago ever since he joined the team in 1880. He was still with the White Sox at the end of the year. McCormick came to Chicago uh, in '85 and '86. He had a record of 31 wins and 11 losses. As for Kelly, in early 1887, he announced, quote, I've determined not to play with the Chicagos any longer. President Spalding and Captain Anson have not treated me properly, and for that reason, I have made up my mind to sever my connection with the champions, which is what he did. Now, Spalding was shrewd enough to negotiate a substantial price for Kelly's services. In this case, it was $10,000 from the Boston Beaneaters. And as they say nowadays, the news quickly went viral, as they say, and newspapers began calling Kelly the $10,000 beauty or the $10,000 Kelly. Chicago's newspapers, God, it was all over the place at Chicago's newspapers. They were dismayed at the men leaving the team. I love what the Chicago Herald wrote, quote, with the loss of Mike Kelly, the granite outfield of the Chicago baseball team is shattered. Abner Dalrymple, who for 8 years guarded left field, has gone to Pittsburgh. George Gore, the great center fielder, has been captured by New York. And now the Telegraph brings the news of Kelly's removal to Boston. Now, the loss of these key players did not deter Spalding from insisting that his men sign temperance pledges again for 1887, and both he and Cap Anson believed that Chicago would win again. Said Anson to a Chicago Herald reporter, "We will put an invincible team on the field just the same." And I found out, and I've read a lot of newspaper articles, and Anson said this every year. Every year, he said the same thing, no matter what the team was like. And sports writers even commented on this after he'd say it. And this year, though, there were all these new young players on the team, along with the veteran players at spring training. There was pitcher Mark Baldwin. Remember, he was hired during the postseason the previous year. Left fielder Marty Sullivan. There was catcher Tom Daly, pitcher Harry Pyle. All these new folks here. Now, both Anson and Spalding predicted a triumphant season for the White Stockings, but the team did not get off to a very good start. The White Stockings held its first game, a home game on May 6th, lost to Pittsburgh 6-3. And by the way, I thought this was marvelous when White Stocking Abner Dalrymple went on the field. He got a standing ovation from the players, as well he should, I thought. Now, the battery of Pyle and Daly here. Pyle had little control over the ball as a pitcher, and I guess Daly could not throw to second base from the catcher's position. According to the Chicago Evening Journal, Chicago was, quote, outbatted, outfielded, and outplayed. And after his fourth defeat in 5 games, one Eastern newspaper noted that, quote, the general feeling is that the club management has sold out Chicago's chances for the league championship. The new talent gave a wretched exhibition, and the only decent ball playing was that done by the old timers. The young players improved though, and the White Stockings finished the 1887 season with a record of 71-50, 6.5 games behind Detroit. Interestingly enough, Boston with Mike Kelly had to settle for 5th place, 16.5 games back, and Pittsburgh finished a distant 6th place, which I was sorry to see. Team captain Anton did his part, hitting a solid 347. John Clarkson took league honors with 38 wins and 56 complete games. Baseball historian Marshall Wright asserts in his history of 19th century baseball that Clarkson, quote, single-handedly pitched the team into 3rd place. His 38 wins accounting for nearly 60% of the team's losses, the team's total. Unfortunately for Chicago, Clarkson said in December he wanted to play for Boston. His family was based there. His father had a family business. I think it was might have been the silver business. I can't remember now, but his family ran a nice little business in Boston. And he joined the Bean Eaters in April of '88. But the White Stockings continued to improve, and they managed to finish in 2nd place in 1888, 9 games behind the New York Giants. And by the way, Boston, with both Kelly and Clarkson, finished a distant 4th, 15.5 games back, and Pittsburgh was again in 6th place. The mighty Cap Anson led the league in batting that year with his 344 average, followed by Jimmy Ryan with 332. Now, Anson's batting average would start to fall beginning in 1889, but he and Jimmy Ryan still paced Chicago that year with the averages of 342 and 325. By the way, Anson would retire in 1897, while Ryan would stay until 1900. Here's you can see how they did. As you can see, 1886, they had a real dynasty, 1880, 81, 82, 85, 86, all finishing in 1st place. They finished 3rd in 1889, down from 2nd the year before. The year 1890, of course, would bring on the Players League. Spalding and Anson had to confront a whole new set of circumstances, and the Chicago team would have to wait until 1906 to again place 1st in the National League. Wrapping things up, concerning the players who left Chicago, most of them did rather well for their new teams, including George Gore, King Kelly, and John Clarkson. They did pretty well. The teams might have done all that great, but they did pretty well. Others had buried records. Abner Dalrymple, as they say in the South, bless his heart. He was sick for part of a couple of seasons in Pittsburgh. He had vision problems. That's what really hurt him. He had bad vision problems. He went to Milwaukee for the American Association in 1891, where he hit 311. 1886 pitcher Jim McCormick had a record of 31 wins and 11 losses in Chicago. But in Pittsburgh in 87, his record was 13-23. He quit baseball after that season when Pittsburgh wanted to reduce his salary. In later life, he ran a saloon. After Jocko Flynn left Chicago, he played for some minor league teams such as Omaha and the Western Association. He also umpired. Silver Flint and Ned Williamson were 2 of the men Spalding spine in July 1886. Glenn stayed with Chicago until 1889 when he retired. Williamson joined the Players League in 1890 and then left baseball. He and White Stocking great Jimmy Wood. I love Jimmy Wood, my favorite White Stocking. I've been doing a lot of by the way, let me put it aside. I'm doing a lot of research on Jimmy Wood for a talk for SABR's 19th Century Committee and meeting in January. And his granddaughter, if you look up piece of work in the dictionary, you'll find his granddaughter's picture. She made all these accusations that Jimmy was kind of involved with the family maid, so to speak, and I mean, he wasn't. But I get it. It's a big scandal, the biggest Florida scandal in Florida at that time. I'll get into that in my talk. Uh, Jimmy was just kind of innocent. Anyway, um, uh, they opened a saloon and restaurant in Chicago called the Wigwam, and they had it till Williamson died in 1894. Spalding retired in 1891, and much to the anger of Anson, recommended a guy named James Hart to take over. And Hart had helped Spalding with the World Tour in 1888 and 1889. I went through various newspapers. Various 19th century newspapers. Some of these were only available on microfilm. I don't think the Chicago Evening Journal is available online. I went through that on microfilm. Chicago Daily News wasn't available online. I went through it. Chicago Herald, I'm not sure about that, but I know I went through it on microfilm too. There were a few negative comments about Spalding. One of them called Hulbert the old man. I guess he was derisively called the old man in 1880, but anyway, David Nemec says in his Encyclopedia of 19th Century Baseball, that big monumental sort encyclopedia, which I just love. He said that in 1886 and 87, quote, Spalding decided to clean his clubhouse of disorganized in quotes, completely, unquote. So, wrapping up, Spalding's temperance policy and his strict rules, followed by his decision to clean his clubhouse, set events in motion that led to the demise of Chicago's 1880s baseball dynasty, which, as Bill James says in his book, was like the Chicago's, best decade ever. Anyway, thanks very much, everybody.
All right, thanks, Jack. I appreciate first off you showing us all of the baseball cards from your collection, I assume.
Mm,
Your old judge at Allen and Ginter's. Those are
yeah,
yours, right?
yeah. Some of them are. Some I got online. Some of them my own. Yeah,
So you do have some of them.
I do have some. Yeah,
Oh, very cool.
yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so does anybody have questions?
Had a lot of fun doing this, as you could probably tell.
I got a quick question. I already put it in the chat, but what is the roots of Spalding's temperance? Is it a religious thing for him? Because I've done scholarship on prohibition and the growth for it and all that, and generally the religious groups that didn't like saloons also didn't like baseball.
Boy,
Not just beer on Sunday, but like, why would Spalding be a temperance guy? Did he think it made him better athletes, or was he religiously convinced?
Ed, you might know. He joined that one group. Remember, Ed? I can't remember what it was called. Do you remember?
Yes, the Theosophy.
Yes.
But his wife, that was more his wife. Spalding initially kind of went along for the ride, and was because she was a member and his mother was a member, he was a
Yeah.
member. And it wasn't until about 1902, 1903 where he actually got involved with the church itself.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. I knew that name that he got involved somehow. I forgot the name of it.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're here.
That's the Adler Doubledays group. Yes.
Yes, right. He built a big mansion, as I recall, too, which is still used for something now to this day.
Out of Port Loma. Yeah. Port
Yeah.
Loma, California. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. That was a great question. Thank you. I
And
got to remember that.
yeah, Jack, you did have one of your slides was a picture of Billy Sunday, right? Was there
Yes.
some connection between Spalding and Sunday with regard to the religion, or what was that?
I don't think so. Spalding, when Billy got religion, so to speak, after he was a member, he started going to the YMCA, as I recall, and he started sitting in on meetings, and he got religion then. And as I recall, his team members did not mock him much for that at all. He really took it seriously, and then he just kind of left baseball after that. But he was a good player. He was a very good player. He did real well. There was a famous game. I read about it in my book where he jumped over a bench and just caught a ball. He played hard and he played to win. But I never read anything about him and Spalding in relation though. Uh, did you Ed? Have you ever read anything about like that?
Sunday was right with the rest of the guys at the bar, and supposedly
Yeah.
he woke up on a street on Dearborn and realized what he had done, and from that point forward, he changed his life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But my understanding is they still welcome Sunday, like when, you know,
Yeah.
after they had retired,
Right.
like when Williamson and the others had the bar, you know, he would go there. He'd go there, you know, looking for customers once he was converted, but they didn't chase him away. They like, you know, they still got along with him.
And I read, I think in one of his books, autobiography or something, that he come across ball players in later life and he'd greet them. They greet him warmly, and he greeted them warmly too. He parted on very good terms with them. He wasn't, so to speak, a holy roller or anything like that. You know, he was a pretty good guy. I love that picture of him, by the way. I think it's a great picture of him. That's another good question. Thank you.
And all these years after 1879 that you have on the screen, this is after Spalding stopped playing.
Yeah, he stopped. I
He
think it was 78.
he played a couple games in 77 and 78, but
Yeah.
he was
Then he became, he was Hulbert's, he was kind of hired as William Hulbert's secretary, and anyway, and then he knew his pitching arm was giving out, and so he wisely, and he had his sporting goods store run with his brother Walter, and he would devote his time to managing baseball business for William Hulbert, you know, signing players. He'd go off to, in fact, just last week I was reading newspaper articles. He would go to such and such a place, observe players, sign them up. And he and his brother Walter had a sporting goods store. Later they expanded it, and it was called uh, uh, was it Spalding and brother, but then his brother-in-law contributed money to it, and they managed to buy a factory and a baseball bat factory, and so it became Brothers.
that was the Brown family, right?
The Brown, yes, the Brown family, right? Yeah, he was the son of a banker. Yeah.
What's interesting in this chart is, yeah, clearly after they got rid of the drinkers, the team went down, but it didn't collapse. I mean, it's still respectable, and it's almost like by 1892, that's probably has more to do with Anson finally losing his skills. Like as long as they had Anson and Clarkson, those guys could carry a team.
Yeah.
And by that time, Anson and Hart just despised each other. So
they did. Well, as I recall, Hart was given some sort of a medallion or a present and contributed by all the ball players, and Anson refused to contribute, and that did not cement relations between the two either.
And Jack,
they hated each other. Yeah.
Where do you come down in your research on Ed Williamson versus Ned Williamson? And I'm looking at you, Richard.
Yeah.
Well, funny you said.
We as a number of members of the chapter know, Ed Williamson is buried in Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago, and we, the 19th century committee established like a new grave, but they didn't know where he was or something, but like he didn't have a good marker, so we got a new marker for him. This is probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and we helped out with that, and I helped out with some of the language on the marker, and just going through his history. I mean, I was researching Ned Williamson, and just in the process of going through all the papers, I discovered nobody called him Ned. And the only time you'll find it in the Tribune, it's almost a fluke, because his name was Edward Nagel Williamson. And
That's
sometimes
exactly right,
they would include Ed, like they'd constantly say Ed, and every once in a while they would say Ed N. So capital E, small d, period, N. And I swear, I think what happened one time, there was a typo where the N got put in front of the ED.
Oh.
And so for about a half a year, this was in the Tribune, they started saying Ned Williamson. And I think that's all that happened was a typo. But like any example I saw of people, like when they started actually using quotes in the 1900s, they talk about, oh, all ball players. It was always referred to as Ed Williamson, Ed. I wasn't finding, too many examples of it being Ned or any evidence that that actually was what anybody called him. It was more, that started to appear in the 1950s or 1960s. And I'm not quite sure where or
So
why.
Richard Williamson wrote for one of the Cincinnati papers during the World Tour. And wasn't his wife's first name, didn't her name begin with an N? I thought some of the things were signed N and Ed Williamson, and I assumed
that may be,
that was condensed to Ned.
Yeah. Maybe I think she was Nellie or something.
I think it was Nellie, might have been.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I read some of those articles. They're available in newspapers. Yeah.
But I'm saying it kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't looking for that, but I just the more I was going through, the more I kept discovering that I'm not seeing any references to Ned. His name seems to be Ed.
Funny you said that, Richard, because I've been struggling with that. I think I used Ned because it was in retro sheet used Ned or something like that.
Like if you do ProQuest, if you do searches on Ed Williamson, you'll get a lot more references because that's what they called him.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we're at about an hour. Does anybody else have questions for Jack?
I really appreciate being here, everybody. Thanks so much for attending.
Thank you.
Great topic.
Yeah, I loved it.
Working more on this. It's a fascinating team. So
yeah,
looking forward to the book.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, me too.
I see a couple hands raised. Mary, do you have a question you wanted to ask Jack?
I was just reacting. So.
Oh,
Laughing.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I have a question. Great presentation, Jack.
Thank you.
Which part of the story have you found lives most vividly in your historical memory? Just kind of in your personal space where this comes to life.
I just have a real soft spot for this whole 1886 season, I think. So, and especially the whole thing that when it was published in the paper and it was revealed that the Pinkerton Detective Agency was called, that's what really kind of cemented things when I thought, my God, Spalding, they had won 8 or 9 games in a row and you call them the detectives. And I just knew that there was a great story there. And again, I'm working on this book on the 1880s, and this is going to be my favorite year, I think, because of that whole thing. Yeah.
Hey, Jack, on the Pinkerton, wasn't there a report? Was it that they said Mike King Kelly was with the players and he was drinking lemonade? And, and Kelly vehemently denied that. I've never drunk lemonade in my life.
I know it. That's right. Now I don't know if that's. I don't remember where I read that. I'm not sure if that's I read it, but I'm not sure if that's was a secondary source or original source. But yeah, I've never read or I've never drunk. Was it 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that? I've never drunk lemonade at 3 in the. Oh, he said you were up at 3 o'clock in the morning out doing something. I said, well, no, I've never drunk lemonade at 3 a.m. in the morning. It was always beer or whiskey. Yeah, I did read that.
Well, Jack,
I've got Mike Kelly's Mike Kelly's biography or autobiography, I guess, but I don't know how much of that to believe, of course. Yeah, see,
No. Yeah.
Well, Jack, this has been an awful lot of fun. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys.
And remember, if you're looking for more information on either Billy Georgis and Violet Popovich or the before they were Cubs early years, look at Jack's stuff, either History Press and McFarland. But thanks again, Jack. This was awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, everybody. So thanks again.
Are we talking, Jack?
Nice talking to you guys.
Thanks for organizing this Emil Rothe chapter, SABR Virtual, all you guys. Peace.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Good to talk to all of you. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah. It's good
Bye-bye.
to see everybody tonight.
Mm.
Take care.
Bye.